Why do you put yourself in extreme physical danger?
When I was 16, I clocked on very early that life's going to go quick. Life just... And I was like, how do I not waste this one life that we live? I've got this capsule, this body. How do I use it to its full capability? I always go back to that quote from Leonardo DiCaprio. People end up traveling thousands of miles just to wind up doing the same damn thing as they would do back at home. And so I didn't want that. I wanted something different, and I had to find that difference on a shoestring budget. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to hike the entire length of Mongolia, solo, unsupported. Because it was through the Gobi Desert, it meant that I would need to carry a trailer carrying 120 kilograms, carrying everything that I needed to survive. At the time, I did not know was a world record. It was only when I realized there was a Navy soldier who had attempted it 3 times, but failed on all 3 occasions. And that's when true doubt seeped into me. But I realized just because no one's found a way to do something doesn't mean it can't be done.
Was there a key moment that you can think of where shit got real while you were in the middle of nowhere or something? Did you have thoughts of like, am I going to make it out of this?
I remember to such a point that my head was scrambled. I did go from thinking about my family, thinking of how much I fucked up here and I could just die. I'd be a corpse in the desert. And my only option was to keep getting up and pushing on. I just didn't know how because the agony. There was this thing in front of me and I almost tried to follow in the footsteps of this thing my mind created. I'm halfway. I get to that water source. I had the last remaining dribbles of water, which was now hot water. And eventually...
Ash Dykes, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, my man. It's good to be here.
Mate, what we're going to start this show off is playing this video, which is like a trailer to your next mission.
That's it. The official promo.
You've just released this. I've not watched it. So we're going to watch it and everyone listening can watch it as well. I'm going to put it on the screen. So
great way to start it.
Let's go with this. I'm intrigued.
Since the dawn of time, rivers have been worshipped as gods, feared as destroyers,
flood to bring death and destruction,
and revered as the cradles of civilization. Among them, one stands apart, named the Mother River. It gave rise to dynasties, inspired myths, and shaped a nation. A 3,400-mile force that has taken more lives than any other, yet gave life to one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. In the last 15 years, I have completed 5 world records in some of the most remote corners of the planet. Now I will take you on a journey back in time to a place that has inspired countless legends. A mission of land, air and water, pushing into extremes that will demand everything I have learned so far. Source to sea, from the high altitude mountains in the west to the east across a place that almost cost me my life 11 years ago, the Gobi Desert. This is the Yellow River with Ash Dykes.
Wow. Okay.
That's it. So we dropped it yesterday. It's been back to back because it's a big international TV show that we're filming. So back to China.
With the BBC?
I can't mention channel, distribution company or production just yet, unfortunately, but it's going to be big. It's going to be exciting. And we should be able to announce that probably within the next month or 2. Because it has to all be in line with the TV industry. So they're like, don't mention us. So I'm like, okay.
Wow. Well, in light of that, I want to ask you, Ash, why do you put yourself in extreme physical danger and life-threatening situations constantly?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's always hard to try to answer this when it's TV and radio. But now I can go in depth. You know, I can really sort of highlight. So I think it's a number of things. To be honest, you know, as a young kid growing up in North Wales, just a small coastal town, I was always very physical, very active, very competitive into my sports. And then as I sort of aged, we're talking 16, 17, I remember I'd be inspired by images that I would see of distant places around the world with different cultures. I would be inspired by people's stories, things that I would see in magazines, on TV, for example, like the David Attenborough show, not wanting to watch nature and the wilderness from a box, but wanted to be there, out there amongst it, being present with it. And I think my curiosity for the world, for different traditions, for learning, and that mixed in with the willingness to push myself both physically and mentally brought in these crazy extreme expeditions. And, the early days was reckless, when I was first traveling. It was dangerous. I was doing illegal adventures when I was 19 onwards. But as things started to build, as my career started to develop, I started to manage these expectations. It was a lot of attention to detail, meticulous planning, because it wasn't a case of winning or losing like the early days now with sports and whatnot. It was a case of living or dying, attempting things that had been attempted before but never completed. And I think it's that willingness to test myself, face adversity, develop myself as a person so that anything that I face in the extremes prepares me for life, because life can be brutal and I want to be ready to face anything that comes my way head on, as well as sharing my love and passion for all of these remote corners of the world that I am fortunate enough to travel to. And, from when I was 16, I clocked on very early that life's going to go quick. Life just... And that's like pretty dark for a 16-year-old to know that. And I was like, how do I not waste it? How do I not waste this one life that we live? I've got this capsule, this body. How do I use it to its full capability? How do I test its mind? How far can I go physically and psychologically? Where's breaking point? Yeah, and I think all of this combined is the perfect direction to lead into what it is that I do today.
Do you feel like you need to have death as an option in your missions? Do you feel like the pursuit of something where you can quite literally die is what you need to go through in order to build that strength to apply into real life? Because I look at this and I go, I heavily agree with this concept of go through more pain and your life will get easier. I preach that a lot. But for me, I draw a line when it comes to, okay, I could quite literally die here. And this is why I struggle to resonate with extreme athletes and extreme sports.
Yeah.
Because I go like, I just don't know the point about that extremity. Why do you like to play in that realm?
Well, I think that takes you to the big boy league. I think when you're dabbling in that sort of stuff, there's a reason why there's very few people dabbling there. And I think for me, when I was younger, I wanted to kind of leave a legacy in a way. I know that sounds somewhat egotistical, but I wanted to do stuff that hadn't been done, to make my print, not necessarily to prove to anyone else, but to also prove to myself that I can go there. And I think growing up as well, there's always this, I clocked on very early that if things are relatively easy to do or comfortable to do, most people will be there. And I'm talking high rocks, I'm talking marathons, ultra marathons. These things are still a challenge, and kudos to anyone doing those because it's still epic. But in that realm, you'll see loads of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people doing that same thing. And that for me, for what I do, is the equivalent of seeing animals in the zoo and then seeing like a wild jaguar out in the wilderness. You've got Mount Everest, which people still classify as epic. But for me, I feel where something is high attraction and brings a lot of attention, you can monetize it. And now if it's being monetized, the corporates, the companies, the brand, the local authorities, the government will find a way to make it more attractive and to make it more doable and more accessible. So the Sherpas will be the ones doing the hard work up Mount Everest, putting in all of the ropes, carrying your luggage for you. Whereas with me, I think the reward comes from striving through great difficulty on a path that hasn't been stitched up for you prior. And you can use that sort of example with anything and everything in a way. I was mentioning to my fiance not long ago, that when I was deep in the Amazon, I came across indigenous carvings from when they used to live thousands of years ago. And they would have been there carving sharpening their tools, weaponry on the riverbank, yet untouched. Now, can you imagine 200 years into the future? Once Suriname gets a hold of that, soon they'll put a glass shield over it for protection. They'll have an ice cream van. They'll have boats taking you up and down that river. And if people are traveling from Australia, from halfway across the world to see this, they're going to start sort of refurbishing it, making the scratches a little deeper, a little darker. And then you go there and it's just not that same feeling, with hundreds, if not thousands of other tourists eating their ice cream, looking at this thing with a little bit of text in multiple different languages. It's just not the same as randomly coming across it. Probably few people have ever seen it. And so I think that's the reward. That's the taste. So that's where then it's not from an egotistical point. It's from a point of, I want the most real and raw experiences that this world can give me.
Mm. Where did this all start? Where was the first mission that you went on, and where was like some sort of thing that you experienced that kind of gave you this bit of a taste, a lick of that ice cream to go, oh, I want more of that. I want to go find more. I want to go explore more.
Yeah, I think it was the first overseas adventure that I ever did, which was a cycle of Cambodia and the entire length of Vietnam on a $10 bicycle with no pump, no puncture repair kit, no map. We used like a certain amount of pennies to pay for an internet cafe, looked at Google, wrote on a piece of paper the different towns and cities, and then tried to pronounce these towns and cities to the locals. And then we were going off pointing from the locals in that direction. And that was, so it was 3 years. I was working in a fish and chip shop. So I don't come from any military background. There's no sort of further education. I, sacked off the whole university direction. And I don't come from a financial background either. So I was working multiple different jobs in a fish and chip shop as a waiter, as a lifeguard, raised the money over 2-3 years and left on a shoestring budget. Ended up in Cambodia and Vietnam after my time in China. And hence why the bicycle was now $10. We were just looking to do these cool adventures, get off the Greyhound or like the tourist buses where they're traveling through the night, overland Vietnam, these beautiful places deep in the mountains that they're sleeping or watching Fast and Furious that they'll never see, And I always go back to that quote from The Beach, a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, 20 years ago, maybe longer, is people end up traveling thousands of miles just to wind up doing the same damn thing as they would do back at home. And so I didn't want that. I wanted something different. And I had to find that difference on a shoestring budget. And so I think it was cycling through Vietnam, puncture after puncture. Bikes broke 17 times in total. There were no gears. There was no suspension. So going up the hills made it very difficult. And I remember there was a point that clicked. Bearing in mind, I was 19, still a teenager. I was like, can you imagine towards the end of my days having a map on the wall with all of these different lines across the world map where I hiked here, cycled there, did that there? That would be a pretty fulfilled life. And at that point in time, I was also against money. I thought it was poison, toxic. So I was quite happy working as a Muay Thai fighter. I'd fight for money, I'd pay my rent, and then I'd go off to the next adventure, or I would scuba dive, teach people how to scuba dive as an instructor, raise the funds, bounce to the next place. Or Australia, fruit picking, which I was up north in Darwin. I was picking mangoes, raise the money, go off on the next adventure, It was very sporadic.
It's an interesting thing you just touched on before around how people go from one destination to another and then they just are filled with consumption throughout that journey. They don't even take in anything that they've just passed because they're in some big bus that's taking them there, or a plane or whatever it might be. And you're explaining that like the journey is the cool part. It's not about getting to that spot. It's kind of the same thing with life. It's interesting hearing you say that. But if we go back to those early times, that first mission on the bike, and you just have a bike, and that's kind of that's all you're doing. You're just going on a bike.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go about food? And was there a key moment that you can think of where shit got real and serious straight away while you were in the middle of nowhere or something with a punctured tire, and did you have thoughts of like, am I going to make it out of this?
So with the Vietnam and Cambodia, because I always say that if you're on a road, you're pretty safe. If you're on a road, there's people. That means there's food, there's water, there's barter. You can buy stuff. And that's what that cycle was. That's why I ended up doing these extreme sort of survival expeditions towards the end. But that was the initial start. And there were times, we were chased by dogs. We were hit by mopeds. We were dodged by trucks and lorries. And for food, we were literally spending, I think we calculated we were spending about 80 pence a day on food. So 80 cents a day, every day on noodles and a sausage or an egg, if we wanted to, if we could afford it, counting away our pennies. And that got us by. And, we were counting on the kind-hearted people of Cambodia and Vietnam as well to look after us as we went. Sometimes the puncture would happen at 2:00 in the morning. We would eventually rock up at a town, having walked there, pushing the bike along. And there's always some locals still up, fixing, working in his garage. We would just rock up and he would like come in and like sort us out. We'd offer him a little bit of cash and talk him 20 pence. But he's like, no, all the best, in Vietnamese, of course. And then the last day we cycled 45 hours straight. So it was all the way through the day, all the way through the night, and again the following day. And that's where I did effectively. I fell asleep while cycling, swerved into the road, like as I dozed off, and my back tire hit my friend's front tire, which woke me up just as a truck went boom right past me. So I think that was probably one where it was like, whoa, too many reckless things going on. But that was early days. That was cupcakes compared to what we were then leading on to,
Yeah, and I guess that's a perfect segue into figuring out this desire to lead on to the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah.
When I speak to people that do these extreme things, each mission seems to get bigger. And, they think they have to do that. And I often wonder about this like gateway thing where you once start out and you embark on something and that was once challenging for you. But now because you overcome that and you want to feel that same feeling you had back then, you need to do something more extreme to get the exact same feeling. And I wonder where you draw the line and where things get too far, because you get to a point where you're in a mission where you've nearly died multiple times, where you're getting chased by these things and you're doing X, Y, and Z, and then you make it out of that. And so then you go, oh shit, like I can do this. So then to try and feel that same thrill, you need to do something even more extreme again. Do you ever feel this where you wonder where it's ever going to end? Or is there something about this that you actually you want it to keep getting more extreme? Like, where's your head at with all of this?
Yeah, no, to be honest, I don't want it to go more extreme. I want it to still be ambitious and still be extreme, but I know where the line is now through the experience. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know where I want to get to. I know where I'm trying to get to. And that is probably, you are safe in numbers. And I want to start sharing these adventures with the world, with the masses via international TV. And with international TV comes logistics, comes health and safety in numbers, comes responsibility. And so there's a way that I can still do these extreme activities, but they're very meticulously planned. They're very careful because they have to be, because it's production, it's TV now. That's not to take away how cool the challenge is. It's cool. It's being filmed now by more people. There's a bigger crew, which sometimes does take away the fun of it. But you've got responsibilities, you've got commitments. I've got a fiance. I would like to start a family with her, and so it would be selfish of me to continue doing reckless things, having them not properly planned, or like with my Mongolia trip, which I'm sure we'll get onto, with zero evacuation and zero insurance. That's not me anymore. They are big, if not bigger than Mongolia, but it's properly planned. And in a way, it's like a career. So all of these different extreme athletes looking to do one extreme, I think it will keep getting extreme until you're at a place that you're happy and content with where you are as a career. So if you're looking at like the corporate world, for example, no one likes being on the bottom step of the ladder or even the middle step. They want to keep going till they're at a place, maybe, so say scuba diving, let's use that as an example. you start off as a dive master, and then you work your way up, and then you're an instructor, but then you could be a scuba dive shop owner, and that's where you leave it to them, to your crew to run, and you just sort of enjoy the rest of your life away from that. So I think people you have to go extreme until that moment clicks where, okay, you've made it. You're doing TV show after TV show.
It's kind of this weird thing where to catch the people's attention that's going to make it more safe, you need to go through something that's extremely unsafe.
It's true, yeah. It's true.
You need to kind of build your way up. You do an extreme. People go, oh my goodness, I cannot believe he just did that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it brings all these eyeballs.
Yeah.
People want a piece of it. We're allowed to add more funding to the projects. And typically with more funding become more heads, and then more heads, more safety impact.
You become a zoo animal. You become part of the problem that you've been working so hard not to be.
That's interesting.
But in a positive light.
See, I wonder about this because like we look at what you're doing and we're going to get into some extreme missions. I'm fascinated. But we look at what you're doing and I can't comprehend it. Like, I couldn't wish that on my enemies doing what you're doing. And you're voluntarily doing this alone without anyone.
Yeah.
And so I look at this and I just go, I wonder what's led him to that moment and what's led him to go, okay, I'm going to go embark on this Mongolia trip.
Yeah.
Right. Like because it started off being on the bike, then it progressed to whatever you did, and then it progressed, and then to the point where you're talk to me about this Mongolia trip, and you kind of progress from going from the bike all the way through to this, and like you near death on edge every day for like a whole year, sort of thing. Talk to me about how it led to that moment, and then what that Mongolia trip was.
Sure, yeah. So after that Vietnam cycle, I think that was the catalyst. That was where I had the first lick of the ice cream, as you mentioned. That was where I was just like, whoa, this was awesome. How do I do more of this? That is where I really felt alive, because I was off the tourist route. I wasn't traveling on the buses watching movies, in hostels or following the Lonely Planet doing the same stuff everyone else was doing. So I was like, what can I do next? I then ventured to Thailand, and I was right up north of Thailand in Pai, and there was a guy sort of on the edge of the jungle with a machete and a bandana. He was kind of like a Thai Rambo in a way. And he offered to take us through the jungle over to Myanmar illegally, no border control, where there's a Burmese hill tribe trying to migrate from Myanmar to Thailand. And he's going, do we want to go? And he'll teach us like survival. And, normally you'd be like, heck no, random man with a machete offering you into the jungle. But we were like, whoa, risk nothing, gain nothing. We were 19, let's go for it. And we did. And that was a fascinating experience. That's when I truly felt, again, at age 19, where that saying became true. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think that's where I first felt so uncomfortable in the jungle. Everything was happening. Everything felt out to get me. I was waking up in the middle of the night on my handmade shelter, which was sort of a bamboo shelter with banana leaves as my bedding, and there were army ants marching either side. And then eventually all of that sort of stuff became the norm. I became very familiar. It was fine. He was teaching us how to hunt, how to gather berries that act as a mosquito repellent, and then we spent time with the Burmese hill tribe. So that was another class experience. From there, they kept ramping up. I went to India. I crossed from India on the border of Pakistan. Again, another very sketchy one. Trekking the Himalayas with no permit, because I didn't believe you had to buy a ticket to trek Mother Nature. So off I went. Again, very reckless adventures. And then there was the time in Australia, cycling across the south of Australia, hitchhiking across the north after we broke down in the wild, fruit picking, working as a door-to-door salesman, raising the funds in Melbourne. And then Thailand happened, and Thailand was a 2-year sort of respite, working as a master scuba diving instructor and a Muay Thai fighter. This was a great lifestyle. I loved it. But 2 years went by, and I couldn't ignore this feeling of missing all of those previous adventures that I had. My time with the Burmese hill tribe, my time cycling Vietnam. And I started getting this itch again. I remember I was with my best mate at the time saying, let's do something more. Let's do another mad mission. But he was kind of dropping off at that point. And it came to me that I was on the tourist route for 2 years with travelers, tourists from all over the world, constantly traveling. The main topic was travel. And not one of them said that they plan on going to or have just come from Mongolia. So I was like, what's up with Mongolia? Why is no one going there? I realized it only opened to Westerners in 2010. We were now in 2012. And I was super curious. And I was like, I want to do an adventure there. The initial plan was let's cycle from Thailand to Mongolia and then walk 100 miles. And then it just continued to get bigger until eventually I decided that I wanted to hike the entire length of Mongolia solo, unsupported, mainly because I couldn't find anyone to join me. It was 3 weeks over the Altai Mountains, 5 weeks across the Gobi Desert, and a further 3 weeks across the Mongolian steppe. And when I say solo and unsupported, because it was through the Gobi Desert, it meant that I would need to carry a trailer or pull a trailer carrying 120 kilograms, 260 pounds or 18 stone, carrying everything that I needed to survive. And that, at the time, I did not know was a world record. I thought lots of people have probably done it. It was only when I realized there was a Navy soldier who had attempted it 3 times, but failed on all 3 occasions. And that's when true doubt seeped into me. And I was like, no way, I'm a kind of a beach bum, Muay Thai fighter, scuba diver. I'd never been to a desert before, and I was 22 at the time. This guy was like mid-30s. He looked like Jason Statham. He had single-handedly crossed the Sahara Desert. So I was super intimidated, but I realized just because no one's found a way to do something doesn't mean it can't be done. Surely with the right training, the right logistics, maybe I can become the first recorded person ever to do this. And then, you kind of grow and expand on it, and you start reaching out to the locals and making sure you've got the local knowledge, because the nomads have been there for thousands of years. If anyone's done it, it's going to be them. And they're saying, no, it's impossible. You always take camels or yaks. And back in the day, we wouldn't have had strong material like a trailer, like a steel trailer to be able to pull that would survive, in which if it broke, you're dead. And like 99% of man-hauling journeys do fail because of the trailer breaking. So I was like, whoa, okay. That's when I started to thinking, if I achieve this, that's a recorded world first. That's like a gold medal. Could there potentially be a career out of doing what I love doing? And that's when it initiated for me as a potential career.
You can't train for that. You're like, oh, maybe with the right training and preparation.
Yeah.
Training and preparation.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
You can't just replicate Mongolia
Nope.
anywhere else in the West specifically.
No, you really can't.
So how did you prepare for that?
I sold my scuba diving kit, had enough money for a flight back home to Wales, moved in with my parents with £200 in my account, couldn't afford any gym membership. My uncle was a truck driver, and he comes across like farmers all the time, and I asked him to pick me up a tractor tire and a sledgehammer, and he did. And in my back garden of my parents' place, training for a world record, I did all of the groundwork in the backyard, flipping the tractor tire, beating it with a sledgehammer, calisthenics. But what I realized, but I didn't really know at the time, I found that out in Mongolia, is everyone was saying, yeah, you're training physically, but how are you mentally preparing? And my answer was, there's no way to mentally prepare. I learned that actually I was in fact mentally preparing that entire time, but didn't realize that until I was at the toughest point during the Mongolia journey. And what I was doing is I was putting 100% doubt and fear into my mindset. I was saying, there's going to be wolves in Mongolia, so expect to be attacked. There's going to be snow blizzards and sandstorms. Expect to face the biggest and the baddest, not because I wanted to face the worst, because of course I didn't. But if I was expecting and visualizing worst case scenario, and worst case was unfortunately bound to happen, then at least I'd somewhat be prepared. I think a lot of people, when you scare someone, if they know you're coming, you don't get them, right? You don't get that shock. But if they don't see you coming, they panic. There's that fight or flight moment. And so for me, it was about eradicating that flight and maintaining 100% fight, so that when and if anything bad happened in Mongolia, I expected it. I now must just tackle it. And I didn't know if it was a thing. I genuinely didn't know. But everything that happened in Mongolia, I was just plowing through. And these were big ordeals, until I faced the heat stroke in the Gobi Desert, which we'll get onto. But yeah, I would say it was 70% mindset. And whilst a lot of athletes visualize the ending, holding the flag, picking up their gold medal, I think with me, I flip that. I visualize the worst case scenario. I visualize the rejection. I visualize the pain. I visualize the setbacks. And I think ultimately that really helps to get to that final goal that you're trying to get to.
How do you keep going in the training camp in the backyard? How do you keep going when you're visualizing the worst case scenarios? Because surely what flows downstream of visualizing those worst case scenarios is, I well and truly could die here. I might not make it out.
Yeah.
And so then what stems downstream from that is you're going to be thinking about all the people you're going to let down and leaving all the people that love you and not being able to live out the rest of your life. And all of these thoughts would be coming in off the back of thinking about a tiger attacking you. So when you're in those moments, what's keeping you going?
Exactly that. Exactly what you just said. You don't want to let your family down. You don't want to die out there. You don't want to fall short of these great challenges that you know are going to happen. If I don't put the training in now, I risk a far higher chance of losing my life in the Gobi Desert than if I put this training in. So it was that discipline through fear is what I would say.
But you can't really train for a fight with a tiger.
You can't, but if you're destined to fight that tiger, would you not be training anyway? And at that point, I had announced it. I told everyone. And so there's probably a little bit of, saving face, not wanting to say, I'm too scared or blaming it on a logistical error. There was the option to blame it on a visa not being approved, but at that point, I just couldn't picture, tap on the back, you tried your best. And I analyzed. I remember coming back and there wasn't one person, apart from, your parents, your family, my nan who was like, I know you'll do it, but she has no idea with what I'm actually going to face. So those people have got your back. But everyone who knew, every expert, every athlete, every Mongol nomad who was saying it's impossible and throwing out all of the reasons why I won't make it and all the different ways that I might die, ended up with me going to the Royal Geographic Society with my logistical agent and looking for the best possible maps. And what I did is I had this, so it was a 1,500 mile journey across Mongolia. We were anticipating around 100 days to complete it. I went and looked at these maps. And what I did is I broke this anticipated to take 100 days down into little days. And I actively searched for this impossible day that everyone kept bringing up. Where is the impossible day? Let me break down. Let me look at the water sources. Let me look at different communities. Let me look at the mountains. Let's analyze the weather. Let's analyze the wildlife. Which one of these possible days is the day that breaks me or that might kill me? And once we really broke it down into the little days, we realized every day was possible. It's just easier for people mentally to say, no, it can't be done, rather than spend so much time and effort finding the right maps, looking into every single day, breaking down this mammoth task and realizing, no, it can be done. Much bigger and greater things have been achieved. So this can be achieved. And that's what I ended up doing, just because I was so scared. I was very fearful. I had nightmares, and there's no lying. This guy who previously attempted 3 times, he was much bigger and better, far more superior and experienced in every possible way. And I couldn't ignore that. And I remember on an email, because I asked him for the dangers, and he said, you need to look out for the drunken nomadic drifters, the grey wolves, the stagnant water, the steep ravines, the dry wells, the snow blizzards, the sandstorms, and the list went on and on and on. And at the end of that email thread, he said, just remember, incredible is the ability to continue no matter what. And I had no idea what he meant. That taunted me through my training. So I'm training my parents' back garden in the snow, in the winter. Incredible is the ability to continue no matter what. What does he mean? Is that him saying it's not possible? Or is that him telling me to dig deep, look internal? What does that mean? Never knew. I actually helped potentially save my life in the Gobi Desert. I should thank him for that. But yeah, all of this was at play, a lot of fear. And I know that there was a lot of doubt because I'd never faced the Gobi Desert. I always say fear comes as a package deal, right? It comes with doubt. Fear is healthy. It keeps you alive. But doubt is there because you're so inexperienced. The only way to eradicate doubt is through repetition, building up the evidence. And eventually, like with snake handlers, The only reason you see them with a snake and you're like, oh, you can't watch them handle it. But they've done this time and time and time again. They've studied the game. They know exactly what they're doing. Yes, accidents do happen, but they don't have the doubt anymore. Probably have the fear of what could go wrong, but they know how to avoid it. And that's the difference. Get rid of that doubt. Keep the fear there. That's fine.
Yeah. What I'm seeing here as well, though, is the more experienced you become, the safer it becomes, because the more you're equipped to deal with whatever you get faced with.
Yeah.
So when you started out on the bike and you come across dogs chasing you, that's probably the same amount of fear that you have in that moment than you would have with something far greater in the Mongolian desert.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of that and the nature of that, you're more prepared for more extreme things. And so it's like a baby that's just learned to walk is at more danger walking on a little ledge that's got a cliff on each side than a person that's done it 1,000 times. It's
exactly.
Same as what you're doing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that quote that the guy who attempted it 3 times said to you might have saved you. How so?
Yeah. So there was a point in the Gobi Desert. So I was slowly dehydrating myself in the Altai Mountains, not meaning to. It was just -15, -20. Wasn't taking as much water. And then almost drastically, I entered the Gobi Desert and it was 40 plus degrees Celsius. The terrain was a mix of gravel and soft sand, which meant the trailer, which was on wheels, was now sinking into the soft sand. Weeks went by and eventually I was slowly slipping into heat exhaustion, onto heat stroke, which is usually fatal.
You were in the desert for weeks?
5 weeks altogether in the Gobi Desert, with 3 weeks on the latter end of that in Mongolia, in the Mongolian steppe, and then 3 weeks prior over the Altai Mountains.
So you were in elevation just prior to that, were you?
Yeah.
How much elevation?
Probably around 3,500 meters, I believe.
3,500 meters of elevation, and it was -15 degrees, did you say?
-15, 20
and
Celsius.
You progressed into the desert at 40 degrees Celsius.
40 plus, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and so talk to me about why that quote saved you.
So as I was walking through the desert, the distances were becoming bigger between wells. Wells is what I was relying on. There's almost little animal tracks that you can follow, and these connect different water points. But we had downloaded Russian maps previously that can analyze sort of confirmed and unconfirmed water points. So there was a certain amount of confirmed and unconfirmed water sources. And my water consumption was a lot greater now. So I was drinking a lot more water because I'm already dehydrated from the Altai Mountains, and now I'm dehydrated in the Gobi Desert because of that. And so I was going through my water rapidly. Eventually we came across a well, and this well was dry, and I had the last remaining dribbles of water left. So that was almost like the crucifix. And from this point, at the start of my worst, I was delirious. I was hallucinating. I could almost feel my organs drying up. That's how much I was desperate on this water source, having water. But yet from this point, I now had 4 days to walk to the next confirmed water source. So I knew there was water at the next point. However, at that point, as I say, there was no insurance. There was no helicopter evacuation like the previous guy. There was overland evacuation, but I would need to rely on 6 days for him to get to me and get me to safety. And at that point, I didn't believe I could survive 6 days. And so I carried on walking. And I've always been a big believer of, visualization, the law of attraction, but I'd never experienced this agony before. It's hard to be positive and visualize when your body's slowly collapsing on you. So what I found I ended up doing is hiding underneath my trailer on the desert floor. That was the only means to escape the sun. And yet that was only the top half of my body. The bottom half was melting. No natural shade, no breeze, no shelter whatsoever, just underneath the trailer. And whilst I couldn't visualize 4 days, I could visualize 100 meters. I could see 100 meters in front of me. So I focused on walking 100 meters and then spending no more than 5 minutes underneath the trailer. And by breaking the goals down like that, it was very painful. The days went by and I was making it closer and closer. And I remember to such a point that there was no experience or role model or something to draw inspiration from at that point. My head was scrambled. I did go from, thinking about my family, thinking of how much I've fucked up here, and I could just die. I'd be a corpse in the desert. And my only option was to keep getting up and pushing on. I just didn't know how, because the agony of the body closing in on you. And I remembered his quote, "Incredible is the ability to continue no matter what." And I kept analyzing that on the desert floor underneath my trailer, trying to think, what did he mean? He was in this position where he called for that helicopter rescue. I don't have that. What would he have done differently? And what does he mean incredible is the ability to continue? And because my head was so scrambled and I was hallucinating, I almost personified incredible. I was hallucinating. I could see this thing in front. I've since learned that it's a phenomenon scientists called third man syndrome, that when you're on the brink of survival, when you're facing such a near death, your mind does stuff to try to latch onto something. It creates stuff to help you through this survival situation that it's never experienced before. But with that in mind, there was this thing in front of me, and it was being routined. 5 minutes under the trailer, kept getting up, it kept pushing on. It was outsmarting me. It was walking quicker. It was taking less rests. And I almost tried to follow in the footsteps of this thing my mind created. And I was replicating, I was doing it. I was doing 100 meters. I was getting there. A day went by, 2 days went by. I was like, I'm halfway. I get to that water source. I had the last remaining dribbles of water, which was now hot water, but I was rationing it. I was doing everything that I needed to do. And eventually I did make it to the next water source. My urine at that point was pretty dark, because I was urinating dead blood cells. I was in an awful way. I had to take 7 to 8 days out before I could push on. But something happened out in that desert. My mind did something, latched onto something. I can't think of any logical answer other than potentially what scientists call third man syndrome. Others would say guardians. I'm not really religious or spiritual in that degree, but crazy.
So what was your mind like there? I really want to go to that moment, and can you go back to there and picture how you were feeling back then? Can you recall anything from back in that point?
Yeah, I just remember feeling that I wasn't necessarily alone. Felt that there was someone there, something else there. I felt, like I said, my insides really needed to be lubricated in a way. They felt dry. I was struggling. My breathing felt dry. I just remember feeling that the trailer felt like 500 kilograms. It almost felt like pulling a concrete block through hell. It's probably the best way to describe it. And I needed the trailer. It was my life capsule. Without it, I'd be dead. But also knowing that I only have this one option. I can either stop, rest, and I will be a corpse, and I don't know who will come across me. Maybe a local nomad on horseback, or I don't know, but I just know that they would just come across me. And the tracking device would still be pinging my location. So maybe it would be my logistics manager eventually. But that only option in time was like, nah, I've trained for this. I prepared for this. I knew this moment might happen. It's not like I was unaware. I didn't know I would get heat stroke. I knew. I signed up to this. This was voluntary. And I also had a voice memo that I recorded. And I told myself I would never listen to it unless I really needed to in the Gobi Desert. I pre-recorded it when I was at home, under shelter, living at my parents', full belly, cup of tea in hand, warm, dry, comfortable. And I gave myself a stern talking to. It was about 5 minutes. And I think what I was saying is the pros and cons of not making this. It was a case of, if you don't keep getting up and pushing on, this is what you've got to come back to. You'll be working in a fish and chip shop in North Wales. You won't progress onto anything. It's a really hard stern talking to. And I told myself, I probably won't need to listen to that. But, how people draw on inspirational videos on YouTube or something like that. Of course, there was no internet, nothing like that out there. It was just my positive self talking to my now nearly dying self. And I listened to it once. And I think that is a method that not a lot of people do. But when you're so excited and passionate about pursuing something, capture it. Because along the journey, you'll forget why you even started.
And then you saw the well.
And then I saw it was a community. So it was a community in the far distance, confirmed water source. And I mean, I just rocked up. I must have looked awful to them, And I just remember, collapsing, and they were like bringing water from the well. And yeah, I stayed there then for 8 days, just drinking water before pushing on.
So when you were pushing on and you were like, okay, 7 days, it's time to embark again, did you fear that you were going to get put in the exact same spot again and have to go through that exact same shit again? Or did you have a bit more of a clearer path?
No, I was shit scared. 100%, because I was like, it could get hotter. But I think I had learned my mistake. I think I was rushing. It was a world first, it's not a speed record. No one's done it before. So I just needed to take my time and get the job done. Doesn't matter how fast I do it. But I didn't learn that until that scenario, unfortunately. So with this next one, whilst I was still scared, I was about 99%. I still had this weird head phenomenon where it was almost like a headache. And I would be out in the sun and it just, it would be intimidating. I almost had this new healthy respect and fear towards the sun. I remember thinking like, oh God, that can really take you. And it's a horrible feeling. Hypothermia, it kind of takes you where it numbs you. And most victims have been found unclothed, where they've taken their hats and scarves off, where they feel comfortable, they feel warm, they'll just sleep. And then that's it. They won't wake up. Not in the desert. You feel everything. You just crawl for that every inch to get closer to that water source, You feel all the pain. And I didn't want to go through that again. And I knew if I take my time, top up on the water, I've got it in the bag. I'm surely past the hardest point now. And then I started entering the Mongolian steppe, those more water, cooler climate. And then eventually after 78 days, I completed that mission, becoming the first recorded person ever to do so. And that was the start.
Wow. Was there any wildlife encounters on that mission?
Yeah, there was actually. I didn't see them. I did see them on the following missions, but with Mongolia, I was told by locals on horseback that there are wolves up ahead and that I would be eaten alive, effectively. And this was all in very scary hand gestures and movements because I couldn't speak Mongolian, they couldn't speak English. But then I started to see evidence of wolves in the area. Wild dogs as well. I needed to be aware of them, especially the Tibetan Mastiffs. They're brutal. The Tibetan Mastiffs are like these big furry dogs. They look like mini bears, and they are to protect the livestock from bears, snow leopards and wolves. And sometimes they aren't staked in the ground because the nomads just are not used to seeing any other humans out there. So these would come up to you. You'd have to throw bricks. You'd have to do everything you can to keep these dogs at bay. So I'd say between the wolves and the Tibetan Mastiffs were probably the biggest threat.
Yeah. So would you say that near dehydration experience in the desert was the hardest part of any mission you've ever done?
It's a good question. I do not know. I've had malaria in Madagascar and made it only 3 hours before slipping into a coma. I've been held up at gunpoint. Now that was scary because there's nothing I can do. It's just whether he had his coffee in the morning, if he's in a good mood. And I've almost lost a videographer on a nighttime river crossing, which was croc-infested during nighttime, during a cyclone. And now that was scary because that wasn't my life. That was someone else's life, someone else's, it's my responsibility. They're on my expedition. So I think that was, for me, I held more fear towards something happening to someone else on my expedition.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. When it's someone else, like it's fine if it's you, but as soon as it's someone else on your dime, that's the thing that. Yeah. Let's go to that time. Tell me that story.
Yeah, this brings it on to Madagascar. This was a 155-day expedition, 1,600 miles south to north via the very interior, coming across communities I'd never seen white folk before. And they would react in very bizarre ways. I'll get onto that, while summiting the 8 highest peaks. And this was an expedition that was just brutal. Held up at gunpoint. I had to avoid the bandits, eaten alive by the leeches and mosquitoes. We were hunting, we were gathering. We had to cross crocodile-infested rivers, oftentimes building a raft to get across it just because we were unsure what lurks beneath. And at one occasion, we had a videographer, Suzanne, She was like Laura Croft, nails, really hardcore. So we were like, okay, yeah, she's up for the challenge. And she's only with us for 2 weeks of this big 155-mile journey. But she was with us with possibly, for potentially the worst part of the expedition, which is right up north, summiting the highest peaks in the cyclone season. And it was at night time. We had crossed almost every river apart from the last one, which was the Marvav, notorious, home for taking lives, home for the crocs being very present there. And by the time we reached the riverbank, nighttime was closing in. A big cyclone was coming, and we had no food this end of the river, and we were still far from the jungle. It kind of opened up more into valleys. So we needed to cross this river because by the time that cyclone hits, we'll have to wait for days. And on that side of the river, there's a community, maybe another 20, 30 miles, which is food. So we had to cross it that evening. There were now 4 of us. We came across a local who was on the riverbank for apparently 6 hours, hoping that someone would come because you need to cross this river forming a human chain. Trying to cross it alone is just suicide. And he was ecstatic to see us. So we listened to everything he says. He knows the river. It's now in full flow. We need to follow his every foot because he knows each and every rock that will keep your head above the water. So we're like, right, okay, we formed a human chain. Nighttime, the river is roaring. So we'd have to scream to hear each other, and we'd be shining each other's head torches in each other's faces. So we were all very disorientated trying to follow this guy's footsteps heading upstream. Suzanne unfortunately missed her footing, and so she was now grasped in mine and Max's grip, and the weight of the rucksack, because we were carrying our rucksacks as well, of course, was pulling her under. She had to continue to kick up from the riverbed to come up, gasp for a breath of air before it ripped her back under. And at that point, I realized if me or Max let her go, not only would the weight of the rucksack pull her down, possibly get trapped, possibly bang her head amongst the boulders that are there with the force and flow of the rapids. This is croc-infested. And further down, like crocs, we might not even find her. And that is all that went through my mind. Miraculously, do not know what happened. She managed to find her footing. We pulled her up. We crossed to the other side. She was in bits, crying. Distraught. I was full of adrenaline and excited. So I was like, probably not making things better. I was like, woo, because we did it. We made it. Oh God, but that was a scary moment. I was like, if we let go, I was looking at Max. You can imagine, right? You can't hear each other. Have you got her? And we're blinding each other with a head torch. She's kicking up, taking a breath. And we're just like, we cannot let go. We cannot let go. And we didn't. Scary, man. So that was maybe the number one I faced many different times, even being held up by a drunken officer ready to shoot me. But I think Suzanne takes it with that river crossing. That was terrifying.
Damn. And so you've got to explain to me what happens after that moment. You get to the other side of the river. It's pitch black. You're hearing the rapids in the background loud, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Like one wrong step and
you're done.
You're done. You get to the other side. You're ecstatic and because you're a maniac. But like she's now in bits. She's like, I'm so lucky to be here. Like, what's going on straight after that river? Can you recall anything?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it took a while. I think we were sat on our bags, sort of thinking all the different scenarios that could have just happened and thinking that we're here. Yeah, kind of leaving people to it as well. We've all got our own emotional state, our own vulnerabilities, our own fears, we're just like, oh, that shit just went down. But then eventually, we pick ourselves up. We've got a location to head towards, and we keep walking. And it's only really the next day that we were able to talk about it fully, And then after that, I think that's the great thing with, I've done a lot of solo missions and a lot of team missions as well. And with the team missions, it's kind of like you've got, in my case in Madagascar, 4 individuals. We're equally 4 individual beating hearts. How do we form as one? How do we bring this into a powerful team? They've all got their own emotions, their own feelings. Then, some are missing their parents, some are missing food, some are hungrier than others. You know, and I think it's facing adversity like that. What you find is these 4 individual beating hearts form as one power beating heart. And you notice it. I don't really know how to fully explain it, but something clicks where you're all synergized and you're moving as one force. And when you hit that moment, you become unstoppable. And I think it was after that point in time, we were just grinding. You know, we sort of really took care of each other's needs, cares, vulnerability. I think we were all thriving off kindness at that point as well. And we were getting through it.
You mentioned earlier that you're not religious or spiritual, really. That's got to be a pretty spiritual journey.
It is, yeah. And when I say not spiritual, I would say I am, but I always try to find logical explanations first and foremost, which is interesting because when I was 19 and I set off for traveling, I told myself, look, my travel is going to take me far and wide. I am going to come across stuff that is simply unexplainable. And I have still to this day, there's stuff that has happened that I've tried to analyze that I'm just like, I can't think. I've put out there as well on the social media and whatnot, and other people just don't have the answer. So, you know, I think if you don't have an answer, stop looking. Sometimes there's stuff that we don't understand. Let that be.
I just think when you're explaining everyone's heartbeats all coming into one power.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can do the same moves. You know what people are thinking. You can respect everyone with wherever they're at.
Yeah.
You know, you can be united, work together as a team.
Yeah.
It can't be no fluke, and there's no like logic that comes into play there.
Yeah.
But you have to have a level of trust in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Do you think trust is a massive part of these missions?
Yeah, it's a huge one. I mean, a perfect example of that is when I mentioned about creating these bamboo rafts to get across crocodile-infested rivers. You're relying on your team member to make sure that he's tied his corner tight and thorough. Because if that comes loose halfway across the river and it falls apart and now you have to swim with your rucksack with crocs surrounding you, you know, you need the kind of trust that you're like, he's got me. I trust that he's tied that. I trust that this raft won't undo itself halfway across this river. And that is through being with each other day in, day out, I guess, you know, and seeing their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Like, for example, Lever, the guy in Madagascar, he was way more effective at tying knots. That's a strength. That's my weakness. Let's delegate him to be the knot tire. So I think at that point, you get rid of all pride and ego. You address each other's strength and weakness. My strength was keeping high morale in a very shitty, dark, negative situation. You know, I had so many emotions and feelings. I was scared. I was hating it. I lost all motivation in the jungle. I couldn't show that. I had to keep that shit internalized. You know, I could feel it because there's nothing wrong with feeling that. But now they're looking to me because they're feeling that, but worse, because they've not had the experience of the Gobi Desert or previous expeditions. They don't have any prior experience to draw upon. I do. So now they're looking to me, and I've got to make sure that, you know, I'm high energy, offering kindness, take my last bit of water. You know, I can go like another few miles until we reach the next spot. You know, that stuff is all the difference. And for me, if it comes to take or choosing people to join me on these expeditions, it won't necessarily be on their credentials as such. It will be based on their enthusiasm and kindness. If someone can be kind during a very dark time, that says a lot about their character.
Yeah. Do you feel like those times in the teams where you've got to put a front up, I guess, to be that leader of like, no, we're good here, even though internally you don't feel good. Do you think that feels very isolating and lonely, even though you're with people? Because when you're alone, you can express the way you're feeling.
Yeah.
But when you have to hold your own around people to make sure that they're good because they're in new territory.
Yeah.
For me, that can feel very isolating and lonely because what you're feeling is not what you're showing up.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you apply this to everything in life is when you're showing up in a way that is not how you're truly feeling, there's a disconnect between how you feel internally and how you feel externally.
Yeah.
What comes with that is pressure and just a lack of enjoyment because you can't express how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that can be a very taxing thing. Did you find in those moments, those were very, very taxing for you to show up in a way that is not how you're feeling in the hopes of being a leader?
Yeah, 100%. It was very conflicting as well with what I was feeling, because as you say, I was saying one thing, but I wasn't feeling what I was saying. I was feeling far from it. And I faced it time and time again. Perfect example was at the source of the Yangtze, which is the next project we'll get onto. But at the source, I remember I had lost 5 members. I had been taken in 5 times by the authorities. I had a first failed attempt at finding the source. I was threatened with deportation, and now my guide was dropped off by the police to collect the horse that we had took with us 25 miles away from us during the evening. And I was only 5 days into a 352-day journey. And all of that emotion just hit me. I didn't know if he would make it back to us. I didn't know if I could take another 350 days of this, And I remember being on satellite phone to my dad, and it was the first time I've ever said, and that he's ever heard me say, what am I doing? Why am I doing this again? Through Mongolia and Madagascar, I never really questioned what I was doing. I got on with it and knew that I was in a really dark space and I need to push on. Tomorrow is another day, day by day. The storm hasn't come to stay. It's come to pass. Just withstand and outlast the storm and I'll see better days. But with the Yangtze River, it was just so overwhelming with how much bad shit went wrong. And I wasn't even a week into a year-long world first. And that was me showing the brave face to the guys that I was with, but telling my parents something totally different, not to worry them either, but I was then able to just let my emotions go. So it's important to also talk about it, right? And not keep things internal too much. I think keep things internal to help others until you need a little bit of help yourself, or you need to express or let this loose. And that's kind of what I felt in Madagascar versus what I felt in the Yangtze, where I really needed to let rip. And, and that was hard for my dad because he can't say, stop, give up, come home, because he might know that I'll regret that. But he also can't say, keep going, because I might die trying. So what do you do as a parent in that scenario when your son is 5,000 meters altitude in the far west of China, with bears, wolves following you for 2 days, looking for any signs of weakness? You have to show no limping, even though your blisters and your toenails are falling off. And, so there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure that comes with it. And I make the mistake of being naive to the fact of knowing I've learned so much on these expeditions, more than I realize. And time again, I've opened up the Yangtze trip. Yeah, come and join me. And 10 members within the first 2 months, 3 months have been evacuated. Fear of wildlife, uncomfortable with that, not able to do this, altitude sickness, because they see it on Instagram and they're like, these are great stories, great photos, great videos. In a room, comfortable. But there's one thing, thinking about it and picturing, yeah, that would be awesome, I can do that. It's a whole different vulnerability when you are out there and you physically have wolves and you're being told by the locals that this is bear season. You need to pick up your pace because look, and they're showing photos and videos of real life bears mauling people, going through villages, storms that have dropped from like -20 to -70 within minutes. It's one of those vulnerabilities that you realize you're just on the menu for anything out here. And I don't think a lot of people are up to that pressure. They might be, but you've got to build up the credibility.
You showed true leadership by being able, a cost of leadership is being able to eat that feeling of like, I just can't share my thought right now.
Yeah.
I just can't.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I feel it, but I'm not, this is part, I've signed up for this. Like, I can't express this because I need to make sure that everyone's as secure as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Because like, we're as strong as our weakest link here. And if these people are doubting and they're trying to turn around or they're going to make noises and arc the bears up, or they're going to act like this because of me not showing them making them as secure as possible.
Yeah.
That's on me. And there's like a level of leadership that that comes with that, and the decision to be a leader kind of results in you having to just eat that cost.
For sure. It's how well you can manage your panic. You all have the panic. Like, I feel as much as anyone feels during times of vulnerability or isolation. Like, my fiance went to Rome traveling solo for the first time, and when she got there, she just broke down. She's just like, why am I doing this? Why did I spend that money to come here? This is dangerous. I'm a single traveler in this. The hotel isn't as nice. And she had these vulnerable feelings. And I was like, yeah, I felt that time and time again. That's fully normal. Just embrace it. Remember those feelings. You'll be absolutely fine. And for her, the next day, she was like, I've always had respect for what you do, but you just being able to relate to something so small of like going to Rome and spending a couple of nights there and knowing those exact feelings and being able to share your stories makes me know that actually what you face, it's not because you don't hold fear. You hold as much fear and as much vulnerability as the rest of us. It's just you faced it so many times and you do still experience it every single damn time. It's just I've learned how to manage it. It's how to manage your panic. We could be in a dark situation in Madagascar, and if I share my panic, the other 3 members might not be able to contain it as much. They might freak. People react in very bizarre ways, right? And they don't know how they're going to react until they're truly put in that situation. And that's not what I want to see, because if they don't know how to manage it, that's it. We all need to be evacuated now because they're causing stress, or they're putting all of our lives in jeopardy or in great danger. And so it's, managing everyone's panic and stress, but not showing it.
So how many people did you start the China mission with?
So the China mission was supposed to be 1 film crew, but they abandoned the trip one day before we found the source of the Yangtze River.
What's the source?
So the source of the Yangtze River is the 3rd longest river in the world and the biggest in Asia. And it's 4,000 miles long. It took 352 days to hike it, and it's across China's entirety. So it starts off in the Tibetan Plateau, far west of China, and actually pours into the East China Sea in Shanghai 4,000 miles later. So that was a Guinness World Record filmed for National Geographic. And so in order for that to be filmed, we had film crew. Sometimes we had guides. Sometimes we had photographers. And the 3rd person to go was a Tibetan guide who was there ready to get me off the altitude in case I suffered from altitude sickness. He, in fact, suffered from altitude sickness, was vomiting and bleeding from the nose, and I had to bring him off the mountains, to a nearby city, which put further jeopardy on my expedition. It meant that I had to start again a month later, which put me in bear hunting season. So this is where the mountains are too cold for the bears. They come off the mountains to search for calories before they go into torpor, which is their version of hibernation. And they will find what they can out on the Tibetan plateau. Humans' intent being one of them. I mean, communities being another one. The amount of photos and videos that I've got, maybe we can share some here. It's pretty horrifying. And so I wanted different teams to join to capture good content for Nat Geo, and everyone that was flown in, 16 altogether at different times, different stages, 10 of 16 were evacuated just because of the demands of the mission.
So everyone was like film crew and all this stuff, but there was no one actually doing the thing with you.
Trying to do the thing.
Oh.
They were trying to keep up. Like, my UK photographer was sent out from the UK, flew to Beijing, from Beijing flew to Yushi to try to find me near the source of the river, probably 2 weeks away from the source I'd started into the expedition. And he lasted 6 hours on day number 1 before he was sent back to the UK. He was supposed to be with me for 3 weeks, but it was one landslide. And again, this perfect example, one landslide that I knew how to overcome because I'd faced this before. And it's the same. He's a photographer. It's like me dabbling in photography. I'd have no idea. I think I know what I'm doing, but I wouldn't really know what I'm doing. He's got years and years of experience. Whereas I often forget that, which is my bad. That's down to a bit of naivety, thinking, yeah, if I can do it, you can do it.
Mm.
And he came and got to a point where I was just like, look, I don't know your capabilities. You do have a family at home. Don't risk your life. We're met by this big landslide. These are the 2 options that we can potentially cross the landslide, but I need you to spend 5-10 minutes on your own assessing, and you need to tell me if you're capable of doing that. Get rid of all ego or pride. You need to do what is safe for you. And I did. I left him there. He assessed, and he just came back and he was like, No. And there was no other way around. It's big valleys, big mountain, And I was like, you've made the right, no matter what you decide, you've made the right decision. And he did. We got him sent back. Like he's alive, safe, well with his family. So that's the main thing, right? We don't want people risking their lives too much. But that was a sheer example of people the Yangtze River, it was just chewing up and spitting out everyone.
Go to a time where you're alone. And it's interesting you mentioned the scariest time was when it was in someone else's life was on the line.
Yeah.
But I want to know about a time where you were alone and maybe there was some wildlife involved. Maybe there was something where you had to run, and maybe there was something, a really scary moment in that 365-day mission or however long it took in China. What was a time where you were alone and you had a big scare?
Oh, there's been quite a few, but what was a big one? Obviously, the Gobi Desert was a huge one. The dehydration.
Yeah, go to the time in China with all the bears and all the...
Yeah, that was from a place, I felt probably more vulnerable in West China, weirdly enough, than in Mongolia, even though Mongolia was a whole solo and unsupported journey. West China, with those altitudes and with the bears and the wolves, that was a big scare. So I think it was the bears. I think there was one time where I woke up in the morning to try to cover as much distance that day because I knew that I was still in a dodgy area where bears were active. And I woke up really early, 4 a.m. through the dark, and I was walking head torch, had a whistle on hand. I had my walking poles there ready, more for protection than anything, but out of my bag so that I could make noise. The night prior, I was gifted a knife by a local, and I was like, what is this going to do to a Tibetan brown bear? It's not going to do anything. And I remember walking, hearing noises and feeling so open and vulnerable with bushes to the left and trees to the right, both towering trees, walking on the small track, thinking, anything can happen. They are out here and I'm making noises so that I don't approach the bears by surprise, because that usually leads them to attack because it puts them in defense mode. And that went on for the best part of 4 months, because it was a 12-month journey. 6 months were mainly in the mountains. 4 months was in that time where it was just too sketchy, bears and wolves. There was also another time that I was followed, but I was with another guy, a guy from Texas, actually, a videographer. He was actually hardcore. He was the one that was able to stand the distance, but he was only with me for 4 days. And during the latter days, we were actually followed by a pack of wolves. And we were warned by Tibetan locals. They were trying to tell us something. And he's actually fluent in Mandarin, but doesn't speak Tibetan. So they were trying to tell us something we didn't know. They just kept pointing at the valley, making wolves, like, ah. And we're just like, yeah, we don't know. Thank you, Zaiti. And, bye-bye. We carried on walking, but he filmed everything. For the next 2 days, we were followed by a pack in close proximity. They usually cover further distance than humans. And usually they're not a risk. It's a massive risk to attack humans as a wolf. So we didn't really think anything of it. We just had to know that we couldn't show any signs of weakness, and we had to set up a fire and whatnot, keep them at bay. Fast forward 6 months later, my production team in Beijing get a hold of that footage, and a guy who spoke Tibetan called me up on the sat phone some months later, I don't know where I was, and said, you had no idea what these guys were trying to warn you of. I was like, no. He literally said, do not go down that valley, because only yesterday a local was killed by a pack of wolves. Completely oblivious. We're there, oh, thank you, bye-bye. Walking. Whether it was the same pack we were followed by or not, we don't know. But again, it goes to show we were thinking one thing, it's too much of a risk for wolves to attack humans. And they told us another, that only yesterday that they did.
Damn. So did you ever see any of the animals?
Yeah, I saw a bear in the distance, and I'd wake up often to fresh bear footprints. I think that was part of the worry, the vulnerability. I was noticing that they're here.
Were you sleeping in tents? Or?
A tent on my own most of the time. 70% of the journey, I would say I was alone. It shouldn't have been the case. Should have had more people with me for a lot longer durations. But there were times that just threw me. And oftentimes, I think mentally what was harder to deal with was when people left unexpectedly. Like that UK photographer, good mate of mine. I was so looking forward to be with him for 3 weeks. It's that morale, it's that communication, it's the banter. And that was gone after 6 hours. And I was like, oh God, I didn't anticipate this. I know the dangers ahead, but I always anticipated, those dangers will be in twos. I'll have someone with me. But now I've got to face it alone. And it's just that throws you.
And what about like food and everything? How are you going through this? Are you setting up a tent in the dark, in the desert? No, in the desert, in the jungle. Like, what do you? How's this work? I'm not sure if you've got photos and stuff that we can pop up. But
yeah, loads of photos and videos.
How does all of this work? Like, you've got a backpack with a tent, and how's everything being carried? Food, all the stuff.
So it varies with each expedition. Mongolia, everything was on that trailer. Everything, all of the ration packs that I needed for the whole duration. The Yangtze, it wasn't a solo trip. It was a first to complete the mission. So with that, I had a backpack with ration packs, but any locals that we came across, I was always about mixing in with the local culture and traditions and experiencing their way of life. This is why I love travel. With Madagascar, it was a mix. A lot of that was gathering whatever we could find: mangoes, coconuts, chilies, fruit, other veg, meat as well. That would be in the case of hunting tenrec that burrow underneath trees. You just put your hand under the tree, pull it out. It's kind of like this rodent, almost like a hedgehog in a way. And then in Suriname, which was the latest expedition, I only returned there about 8 months ago, back from there. That was dropped in the middle of the Amazon, and whilst we took 10 days worth of ration packs for a near 2-month journey, a lot of it was hunting and gathering. And a lot of that was Cecropia tops, which can be found on trees, which is kind of like a vegetable, which my guide Dick learned by studying the spider monkey. We can digest what spider monkeys can. And the spider monkeys kept eating these Cecropia tops. So one day he just tried it and he was fine the next day. And then other times we were doing a lot of fishing, and a lot of cutting. So we would go to the riverbank with a machete on the Kopanam River in Suriname, in the Amazon, at nighttime, where all the fish would come in to sleep. We'd have our head torch and we would just see all of these shining eyeballs reflecting. Some were caiman, others were piranha, some were wolffish. And you'd go in with your machete and crack the back of the head. Not of the caiman, but of the piranha, stingray, and wolffish. And you'd pull them up. So we were catching piranha that way, the black-bellied piranha, 4 or 5 times the size of the red bellies, which are like famous on movies. These were big. And then wolffish, you're almost looking 1 meter, maybe more, longer.
You'd eat them.
We'd pull them out, and we would eat them.
You can eat piranha.
You can eat piranha, yeah. In many different ways as well. You can boil it, you can fry it. Yeah,
man. I'm so fascinated. It's such a crazy life. Like,
it is bizarre, isn't it? And you know what? I think what's crazy is this for me is the challenge. What's often hard is people struggle to relate to what I do. And what I do is I see in my mind as it's the physical endurance side of it. It's like the Iron Man's then some. And when I say that, because I get a lot of questions about, especially on social media, with David Goggins. And it's like, look, that man is a savage. He's a legend, a household name. But what we do, whilst people think it's similar, it's totally different. Because with the endurance challenges of doing over a marathon a day through the Gobi Desert, pulling 120 kilograms, 18 stone, I don't get to go back home and shower and eat normal food. I have to, like the Amazon, hunt, catch my own food, set up my own hammock. I'm out there oftentimes 34 days without seeing a single human. So it's like, it's an endurance challenge meets you have to survive. There's going to be no van following you, no tarmac road where there's people, there's food, there's water. You're doing a marathon plus a day, every day, through the harshest environments. And then at the end of the day, you don't get no phone call. You're under the jungle canopy. You don't get no food. No van's going to drop off a, Tesco meal deal. You're out there surviving your shit. You will only eat if you catch. If you don't catch, you will not eat. And that's why we lost 13 kilograms in the jungle altogether, even though we were eating, but there's only so much that we can gather. And in terms of hunting, you can only really hunt what doesn't hear you coming. And through the jungle, everything hears you coming.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. Just as we kind of get towards the end of this, I want to ask you a question about death, because I'm fascinated. Do you think about death much? And I guess the thing I want to know is, what do you think would kill you first? Age or these missions that you're going on?
I would like to say age, because I think I'm at a point now where there's more backing. The finance is there. The production's there. So the safety's there. Like even with Suriname dropped off in the Amazon, whilst there wasn't necessarily evacuation per se, we had everything covered that in an emergency, we still worked the best possible route that we can get out of there, even if it was a struggle, depending on where the incident happened underneath the jungle canopy, because we needed an opening. And like with this next project, whilst it's dangerous and there's a lot more sort of extreme activities from skydiving, scuba diving that I'm going to be implementing, because that's also my background, land, air and sea. I've got all of the licenses and qualifications in that. Again, it's a bigger profile expedition. So unlike Mongolia, where there was just no profile, there was no clout, there was no finance, there was no insurance, there was no evacuation. Now they are getting better. And that's not to deter the extreme and ambitious aspect of these latest ones, because they are still in every way. But you've got to look after yourself, because, man, I fear death. I love life. This is why I do it. I just love living. I love getting out there. I love having these experiences, like all of them. Probably I've faced so much in my life, but probably the greatest experience of a human being that I've had is falling in love. Is back to basic human things that happen to the everyday person. It's not necessarily going out and doing these. I love that stuff too, but I love the luxuries. I love I'm getting loads of cramp here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love the luxuries. I love the comforts. I think it's being very adaptable. So whilst I love these extreme endeavors, I make sure that there's a way that I can survive it. If I'm like, oh, it's only 95%, it's not worth it. You're going to die. Just do it properly. Just study. Put the groundwork in. Put the homework. And if you know full well 100% mentally and physically you can overcome that challenge, go for it. Yes, accidents happen, but I wouldn't willingly cross a road without looking left, thinking, yeah, I'm sure there won't be a bus. It's just making sure you've got all angles covered. Albeit with what I do, there's so many more angles to cover. Doesn't matter. Cover those angles. Don't be silly.
So you mentioned falling in love is the greatest thing that you've felt.
I think so. Yeah, I think I've had so many experiences. I've experienced, like, I remember in the Gobi Desert, my logistics manager, because I said to him, can you imagine there's going to be pure silence? And he replied, there's no such thing as silence unless you are dead. Never knew what he meant. And then when I was in the point at the Gobi Desert where there was utter silence, that's where I heard my own body functioning. Didn't know it straight away. It took me 15, 20 minutes to realize there's this humming noise that I've never heard before. I thought maybe it's in the trailer. There was no wind, no insects. There was nothing out there. I walked about 100, 200 meters away from my trailer and I could still hear it. And it was at that point I realized that's what he meant, because he never told me. He was like, as long as you're still living, you'll always hear your body functioning. There's no such thing as silence. I've seen the darkest skies. I've had the northern lights explode. I've seen the biggest sandstorms. I've seen the most dramatic sunsets. I've seen people's reaction to seeing humans for the first time ever. I've been in the middle of the Amazon experiencing a jaguar's first time ever seeing a human and its last time ever seeing a human. Experienced the biggest highs, the darkest lows. But, falling in love is just, for me, it tops all of them. Not in a way that I'm poo-pooing all of them, because they're all unique in a way, but I'm saying that just because I've experienced so much doesn't mean you and the everyday person can't experience the greatest stuff, because you still can. The greatest stuff is often experienced in everyday life as you evolve, So it's a beautiful thing. So whilst it seems all dark and like, whoa, reckless and adventurous, all of these expeditions, it is purely based on the fact of I just love living, love experience. I don't want to waste life. It's too precious. There's just so much to see and do. Like, I won't even stand in a queue, like waiting for whatever it might be, an ice cream. My girlfriend's like, why do you see that as a waste? It's like, I am in the moment. But I don't like spending half an hour in the same place queuing for something unless the reward is absolutely worth it. Otherwise, there's better stuff we can be doing.
That's so cool. And so just as we close out, tell me a bit about this mission that you're doing, and tell me what you want to say and enlighten me on what you're about to embark on.
Yeah, man. The latest project, maybe the biggest step of my adventuring career so far. A big 3,500 mile journey from source to sea of the Yellow River, north of China, starting off in the Tibetan Plateau, far west, nearly 5,000 meters altitude, crossing the Gobi Desert, again, a place that nearly killed me, all the way to the sea out far east. But with this, it's a mix of land, air, and water. I'm going to be jumping from helicopters. I'm going to be paragliding. I'm going to be scuba diving. I'm going to be kayaking. I'm going to be mountain biking to showcase what is regarded the deadliest river on the planet for the fact that it's taken more lives than any other river. But its history, its culture, its tradition, and the fact that Chinese civilization, one of the first civilizations ever, was actually birthed on the Yellow River banks some 7,000 plus years ago. So this journey is going to be massive. It's a big international TV show. That's why I say it's the biggest step of my career. I'll have a full production, 10 to 12 members filming an entire sequence from source to sea, which is going to be aired internationally. So, it's something that I've been planning now for a good year to a year and a half. Massive team. And I leave this Friday. I leave this week. In fact, probably when this episode drops, I'm probably in China already, right? So, and China's like a second home. They've always got my back. My brand, my name is much greater in China than it is in the West, just given what I've done there with the Yangtze River. I filmed a big international TV show following the Great Wall of China for 21,000 kilometers. So things have developed well there. So they welcome me with open arms, and it's like a second home to me.
And what scares you the most about this one?
What scares me the most is all of the different extreme activities that I'll be doing, not for the fact that it's the likes of paragliding, potentially in strong temperamental winds and jumping out of helicopters. It's the pressures that comes with TV and performing. I've got to stick to my grounds, to my guns, and know when enough is enough and when to listen to my gut, put things off. Let's do that tomorrow. Today doesn't feel right. It's all about that. You got to feel it. You got to be in the moment, and outside distractions can really throw you off. And, with this, there's no second chances. And so probably that. And of course, making sure the team are well looked after as well. It's a big production team. They can look after themselves, but we all go into high altitude. And I know what comes with that. I've evacuated too many people in the past from that. There will be the bears. There will be the wolves. But again, safety in numbers. But I just cannot wait to share, because it's not necessarily about me, this journey. It is about the Yellow River. It's about the people that call it home, all of the traditions and culture. So I'm getting to really show off a different side to China. And we're talking West China is just so incredibly remote. They're living how they used to live thousands of years ago. And as you follow the infancy of the Yellow River to where it's almost 10 miles wide towards the sea and where there's cruise liners, you're talking mega cities that are 20 years ahead of the likes of London, 10, 20 million plus people, where the whole skyline is in synergy with its lights. So it is almost like a journey of 7,000 years, going back from where it first started to modern day age of how we run things today.
And what do you want to get out of this?
I think with this, I want to shine a different light to China. I want to take people on an adventure in a way that hasn't been done and show people the Yellow River in a way that hasn't been shown before. I think you've got many TV presenters and, they'll be presenting with their boots on, observing from the outside. But with what I do and with what I bring to the table, as you've seen, I get involved. I won't be on tandem paragliding. It won't be a tandem jumping out of the plane. It will be me solo, or qualified, or licensed. It won't be me observing in a Mongolian wrestling. I'll be getting involved in the wrestling and wrestling a Mongolian champion and getting my ass handed to me. But that's what I really want to bring, the spiciest food, the craziest traditions, the biggest wrestling, the highest drops, the greatest paraglides, kayaking, the most extreme rapids, getting involved and just showcasing on a much greater scale this adventure, because these adventures just inspire people. And I want to inspire people to get off out into the outdoors, put your phones down, reconnect with nature, live, stop wasting time, get out there. And I think that this will do that.
I love it, man. Thank you.
No, thank you, man.
I want to commend you. It's really cool. It's inspiring.
Appreciate it.
There's just it's so unique. And I think what you're documenting is really cool. And it's just going to make people, the more you continue to grow, people are just going to be so amazed. And I think you should be really proud of what you're building. So congrats.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, thank you. And I'd love to open it up and have people join one day where it's safe. I'd love to take people, open it up again, have people out there with me, get involved. And then again, with all of these, I think it's important to touch on, with all of these expeditions, they've not been for the sole right of world records. With Mongolia, I was raising funds for the Red Cross who support the local nomadic way of life. I was also raising awareness about climate change and the effects it has on their way of life. With Madagascar, I was raising funds and awareness for the lemur network conservation, doing everything to protect the unique biodiversity of the island. Stunning. 90% of all plant life and wildlife found in Madagascar is found nowhere else in the world. And then with the Yangtze, I pointed up with WWF and UNESCO. So it's always a bigger key angle. If you can do what you're passionate about, do what you love, but bring in key important factors, give back and help where you can, that's the beauty of these combinations of the adventures.
Thank you so much, Ash. I appreciate
it
on the show, man.
Thank you, my man.
Thank you. I'll speak to you very, very soon. Definitely. And if you guys have made it to the end, make sure you follow and tune into all of Ash's stuff and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple. It'll help the show grow, help us keep getting awesome people like Ash back on the show. And just screenshot this and tag us in your Instagram stories so we can personally thank you.
Yes.
We're going to sign up for if you're going to be in the desert. Oh, no, in the jungle. I don't know how this is going to be when we release this. But thank you guys for tuning in and we'll see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.